These were Hank Williams Jr.'s 444 Marlins. And what was interesting about them, when I saw that he was selling them, these are pre-safety. So there's no unsafe safeties on them. So right there, they're a touch of class. Hi folks, Tim Sundles here. My beautiful wife Kim is filming. I want to talk today about how to take a rifle, an over-the-counter rifle, and make it yours and make it fit your purpose. And so I'm, as most of you know, I'm a big hiker. I'm a big just get out in the woods and be out in the woods guy. So I call that woods bumming. I mean, most of the time, most of the summer, even most of the fall, when I'm taking people elk hunting or deer hunting or moose hunting, whatever, most of the time for me, it's woods bumming. I just like to be out there. And around here, of course, we have grizzly bears and other toothy, clawy things that I want a lot of power in a rifle. Sometimes I'm happy just to carry lever action rifles that are very powerful and realize that my practical range is limited to, 200 yards, which if you're just carrying a woods bumming gun, it's mostly just for saving your skin. It's not really for any other purpose. So I want to talk about what I did to these two. They started out to be identical rifles. These were Hank Williams Jr.'s 444 Marlins. And what was interesting about them, when I saw that he was selling them, these are pre-safety. So there's no unsafe safeties on them. So right there, they're a touch of class. And he wasn't asking an exorbitant amount. This one is pretty much almost collector value gun. It's very, very clean gun. And so this one had a little more bluing wear and a little more stock dings on it. So I bought them both, figured I'd leave this one as a collectible, and then I would take this one and make it into something that I can use in the woods that I'm comfortable using. So let's start with the sights. If you look at the original, it's got these semi buckhorn sights. Here, I'll open the action on it. And, with a round bead on the front sight, these are very unprecise. And not only does it have the sights that are very, very imprecise, it also came with a 24-inch barrel, as did this one. So what I did was I asked Dan Coffin, and these were for sale in Dan's shop. Dan builds custom rifles. He's all out of the gunsmithing thing, I think, as of this time. And he's just focusing on building custom rifles because that's what he enjoys. And so I asked Dan, I said, I'm going to buy both of these from Hank. And I said, would you cut and recrown this barrel to 22 inches? Now, I prefer 20 even more, but 22 is something that comes off or out of a vehicle easily, comes out of a horse scabbard pretty easy, but 24 is always in the way. You're always banging it and clanging it, getting it off a four-wheeler or getting it out of a truck. And if you're in heavy brush, it's just too long. That muzzle end of your barrel is always hitting things. So what I did on this was I called Andy Larson of Skinner Sights, and I said, Andy, send me some fronts. And I said, this thing's on a riser, and so I need some front sights that don't just have a 3/8 dovetail in them to drift in to a riser, but I need some sights on a rise, some front sights on a riser or on a front sight base. There's the three that he sent me. Now, when I went to, when I went to take off this front sight base that Dan reinstalled on here after he cut and crowned the barrel, he soldered it on, as well as there's retention screws. And I just decided not to mess with the soldering. So I dug in my old sight box and pulled out a front sight with a 3/8 dovetail base on it that I could just drift in. And it's a nice little white line sight. I believe that's one of the old XS, very narrow front sights, which I don't mind a narrow blade at all. And then Andy sent me this rear sight. And I said, just send me any one of your Skinner Express, for that vintage of Marlin sight. So what I've done is, even though the barrel is 2.5 inches shorter than it used to be, I've still increased the sight radius by another 6 inches or so by putting an aperture sight on it. And if you practice with aperture sights, and by the way, I screwed the aperture out of this to get the biggest opening possible. He sent me different aperture sizes, but I just prefer the base, that's a huge aperture. They don't get shadowy. When you get in heavy timber or low light situations, great big aperture stays nice and lit up, doesn't get shadowy. They're very fast. And if you learn to use them, they're just as precise as a small aperture. So I get a shorter barrel now that I like, and I get sights that are very precise. And now I've got a class act woods bumming carry around gun. And even had I gone, and I have others with 20-inch barrels, so Dan cut this one to, it's 21.5, 22 inches. For hunting, the barrel's plenty long, especially with this kind of sight setup. They're a touch of class because they don't have the stupid unsafe safety. And the only other thing is, and you can see this is a Monte Carlo style stock. And back in the 70s when Marlin, and the 60s when Marlin was making these pre-safety 444s, people were starting to mount scopes on lever actions. So Marlin comes out all set up with a Monte Carlo stock, which, makes it pretty high at the comb. And if this bothers me very much shooting full power loads, which I already know it's not because I've already been testing it. But if it did bother me, I would just go back to Dan Coffin, who does his own stock work, and I would just have that cut down so that maybe right here, up here on the comb, it's a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch less tall. Now I've got a long neck, so my head comes up and moves forward, and stuff like this doesn't bother me unless it's really exaggerated. People with a short neck will force them to when they shoulder this, to put their cheekbone right down on this Monte Carlo stock. And if the recoil's severe, it'll recoil and keep hammering that cheekbone. Doesn't bother me that way because of my long neck, so I'll probably leave this alone, although I don't like it. So what I've done is create a woods bumming multi-purpose rifle that for my types of uses is much better, much more useful than it was in its original form. And this one, I don't know, I bought it just because these are so hard to find. I didn't buy it so much because it was Hank's. It's just that these pre-safety old 444s are kind of hard to find. And he had 2 of them, and one of them was rough enough. I didn't mind, changing it and ruining its collectability. So we've gone from out of the box type, albeit in the early 70s, out of the box rifle to adapting it to my needs for it with different sights, much more precise sights. I mean, if your sighting system sucks, good luck. And you cannot, if my wife can zoom in on that semi buckhorn rear sight, you cannot get very much precision with that kind of a sight. So You know, I get more precision by extending the sight radius and more precision by going with an aperture type sight and a front ramp that's highly visible, painted white the way it is. And now I've got a gun I can traipse all over. The length isn't too long. It's not ungainly. It balances so nice. And I'll probably put a butt cuff on here to hold a bunch of ammo so that when I pick up the gun, I've got 8 or 9 rounds more of ammo with me, and it's just automatically with the gun. Anyway, folks, I wanted you to see the difference between a gun that has been made your own, you know, customized to fit your body, and then, you know, as opposed to the factory gun. And just one other thing, you know, these are original Marlin butt pads. I did not change the length of pull. I could have changed the length of pull, and I definitely could find butt pads that are softer, because these things are 50 years old, 60 years old. Didn't want to do any of that. It fits me good enough the way it is. The 444 with heavy duty loads like our 335 grain flat nose hard cast is a killing machine in these parts. Will kill anything on the North American continent if the ammo is loaded right. And so now I've got a woods bumming gun good enough for grizzly, good enough to hunt elk if I want, hunt moose if I want, hunt deer if I want, and it's in a nice, slim, trim lever action that I can just enjoy carrying. So our next film on how to make a gun custom for you, for your needs, be it woods bumming or hunting, I'm gonna do with a bolt action Mauser rifle. Also bought that from Hank Williams Jr. It's a highly modified and refined Mauser action that was built into a 308 by, I believe, Mauser. I think it's a Mauser brand rifle. And we're gonna do all kinds of things like shorten the barrel, change the sights, mount a scope, and gonna send it off to Macmillan and have Macmillan put one of their lightest weight stocks on it they can and make this a really all-weather kind of gun. You know, even though it was probably built in the 50s, maybe the 60s, or probably even the 40s or 50s. It's chambered in 308 Winchester, and it'll be a woods bumming gun with a scope mounted on it. And I don't know that for woods bumming you can do much better than the versatile 308 Winchester. I mean, I just don't know you can. Or the 30-06, they're not that different from each other. 30-06 would be in the same ballpark. Anyway, we'll do a video. That video is going to take 6 months to come out because Kim and I are leaving for Africa very shortly, and I can't get all the work done while I'm gone. So anyway, but this summer we'll have that rifle all set up with the proper Macmillan stock, proper sighting system, shorter barrel, all kinds of stuff, and I'll show you the before and after on that rifle.
And shout out to Macmillan Stocks for contacting us and wanting to collab on Instagram and with Tim. Tell them a little bit more about Macmillan Stocks and the company that you know.
Well, so I've been using Macmillan stocks. I was getting into synthetic stocks when they very first came out. And when synthetic stocks very first came out, I mean, I'm going back 40 years, Chet Brown was the only person making them. And they were a fairly cheap, fast produced stock. And so we used to buy those and gut them and then rebuild them stronger, reinforce them, make them stiffer, and set them up. And Richard Scott used to do that for me. And then Richard Scott became High-Tech Specialties and started making his own stocks that were a serious upgrade from Brown. And about that time, Macmillan started making stocks. So they've been making stocks, it's gotta be 30 years or more. And I would say that Macmillan probably makes the sturdiest aftermarket fiberglass synthetic stock that I've seen. And I've probably got them on 25 of my rifles. So we'll delve a little bit into McMillan stocks. They contacted us a month or two ago and said, you know, we keep seeing when you show rifles, we keep seeing our stocks on your rifles. Would you guys like to collaborate with us? Well, having used McMillans for 30 years plus, I'm like, yeah, you guys probably make more synthetic stocks than anybody in America, any stock maker in America. You've probably been doing it longer at this point than any synthetic stock maker in America. And I know how heavy duty and strong they are. So yeah, let's collaborate. So that rifle will be going off to McMillan, and then Dan Coffin will shorten the barrel, reinstall the front sights. On a woods bumming rifle, if you're way out in the woods, it's always good to have backup irons on the thing that are pre-sighted in. So if you break your scope, you can always just pull the scope off and you're not without some kind of sighting system that's already dialed in. Folks, hope you can see what it is I do when I customize a gun to make it work for me when it comes to lever actions. And we'll bid you adieu now. God bless. We'll see you on the next video.